8th, 1941, the United States Marine Corps, backed by the might of the Navy, occupied the country of Iceland in order to ensure its adequate protection. The Ballad of the Leatherneck Corps, written by Herman Wouk, is dedicated to those Marines who are now standing guard in Iceland, outpost of our national defense.
From the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli, we fight our country's battles on the land and on the sea. Admiration of the nation we'll blindness ever see, and we glory in the title of United States Marine.
Oh, the wind blows cold in Iceland, but the wind's blown cold before. And it's not so hard in your own backyard to be set for peace or war. But to strike a blow at a distant foe is a job for the Leatherneck Corps. Where are you heading, Leatherneck? I'm off to Tripoli, son. It's someplace in Africa, don't know where, but an ornery pirate gang is there, and we're under orders to sweep it bare of each pirate's son of a gun. So off they went. It was 1805, and they piled in there with a mighty drive till hardly a pirate was left alive. And Jefferson said, "Well done." Oh, the shore is strange in Iceland, but the shore's been strange before. And the folks at home don't have to roam to be set for peace or war. But to challenge fear when it's far from here is a job for the Leatherneck Corps. Where are you heading, Leatherneck? I'm off to Sumatra, son. The natives there are a savage lot. Our ships have been sunk and our sailors shot. And that place which they tell me is burning hot will be hotter before we're done. So off they went, back in 32. And vengeance was had for each murdered crew, and over the isle, Old Glory flew. And Jackson said, "Well done." Oh, the sea is rough off Iceland, but the sea's been rough before. There are no rough seas where you sit at ease, all set for peace or war. But to face a fray half a world away is a job for the Leatherneck Corps. Where are you heading, Leatherneck? I'm off to China, son. A bunch called Boxers are raising hob. They're killing Christians, this crazy mob. So the U.S. Marines have got a job, and this one looks like fun. So in 1900, they sailed away and fought the Boxers in Old Cathay. Pagodas crashed, and they won the day. And McKinley wired, "Well done." Oh, the gale roars high in Iceland, but the gales roared high before. And it's cozy here by the hearthside cheer to be set for peace or war. But to make a stand in a far-off land is a job for the Leatherneck Corps. Where are you heading, Leatherneck? I'm off to Iceland, son.
Well, that was nice. In scouting, I used to have to put up my scout sign, and that's the only way we required people. Well, welcome to the Military Heritage Museum's Veterans Day ceremony. We're going to begin that shortly. I've got some opening remarks. For those who do not know, my name's Gary Butler, and I serve as the executive director of the museum. And I'm very excited and proud of all of the veterans that are here today, and certainly especially those that serve here at the museum. We got a few things to cover. One will be the drawing of the wreath that the Wreaths Across America have been using to raise money for the wreath laying ceremonies that will take place in December. So they will be in here shortly with the numbers, so I can read them. Okay. So just let me know when you want me to read the numbers, Pat. Today, following the ceremony, we have a number of activities going on in the museum, as always, and you're welcome for those of you that would like to stay to participate in those museum activities. Just be sure to check in at the front desk. We also have the cockpit tours of the Huey. We have the Gus, the owner, Gus Hawkins, and Gus Gusterson, who was a gunnery on the Huey during the Vietnam War. So they'll be assisting those of you who would like to visit the Huey and learn more about the Huey and take a cockpit tour. Later on this evening, we do have the special tribute show for Veterans Day, and there are still some tickets available. If you would like to purchase those tickets, you can do so that as well at the front desk. Very excited about that show. Tremendous our artists have come in. Be a large group of 10 performers tonight, singing a number of your favorite songs from generations in the past. I won't say how many generations in the past, just generations in the past. We'll just let these few guests come in. Okay. Do we have the drawing for the wreath? I need the numbers. Just make sure it's shook up really well, because you know who won it last year. I believe I won last year, so. But I did not draw the ticket. Oh, no, it's not me. Ruth Teague. Oh, okay. Well, if you're here, you can take the wreath.
Ruth Tighe, T-I-G-H-E.
Okay.
She's here. If not, we know who she is.
Okay, we know who she is. Okay, it's now my pleasure to introduce our Master of Ceremonies today. Ron Sush, Dr. Ron Sush, has a very distinguished career, both as a military and as a civilian, as a veteran. Ron, if you don't know Ron serves as one of our resident historians. He's also the librarian, and spends a tremendous amount of volunteer hours here at the museum. His military career goes back to the Vietnam era, where he served 6 years as a Marine. He served in during his tenure in Vietnam. He rose from the ranks of private to major, right, and sergeant, and retired, and then left the military as a major. He also recipient of the Purple Heart, as I believe. So, a great veteran to be our Master in Ceremonies. He holds a doctorate degree in military history, and has a wealth of knowledge. For those of you who have been up to the library, he has the answer, the story for many of the questions that are raised. So it is my pleasure to introduce this. This is just one of our many, many great veterans here at the museum, Ron Sush. He will serve as your master of ceremonies today. Ron?
After being introduced, I always like pointing out if my parents were alive and if they were here, my father would be impressed and my mother would believe all of that stuff. One of the things we like to do is welcome all of you with great appreciation for your willingness to be here and participate in this kind of ceremony honoring veterans of our community, veterans past and present. In so doing, when individuals and guests come to the museum, we always ask if they've been in the military, if they have served. And I think it's important that in this audience, we recognize those individuals who have worn this country's uniform and served and are veterans. So I would ask all veterans in the audience, the individuals on the stage, if you're a veteran of the United States military, would you please stand so the people here can thank you? And while you're standing, there's an old adage, and I mentioned it yesterday, and go ahead, feel free to sit, relax. There's an old adage, and it's worth repeating at times like this. For the civilian population, as a reminder, if you sleep well in your bed at night, it's because out there in the dark, there are rough men who would visit violence on anyone who would bring you harm. But there should be a corollary added on. Times have changed. The military and the services that require individuals go in harm's way now includes women in the military and combat roles, but women in the fire service, women in police service, EMT. And seated here today, there are also individuals who are currently serving in the United States military. These are the individuals who protect us. And they're certainly all worthy of our appreciation and our thanks. And the Military Museum tries to do that. So again, for you veterans and individuals and the groups we've just mentioned, you have our sincere appreciation. We honor you on this day. It was 103 years ago today when the guns fell silent in Europe, and we used to call this day Armistice Day. The doughboys who served in that war are long gone, but their memory continues on, and it's carried on. Their extreme heroism and sacrifice is still appreciated by the people of the United States. Ultimately, we changed the name from Armistice Day to Veterans Day. And it's a worthy change that we now have. And though some of you can remember Memorial Day, which we now have at the end of May. Do you remember when it was called Decoration Day? And it's to some extent changed. Today we honor veterans, both living and past. And on Memorial Day, we remember those who have given their lives. And I can't think that there are two better ways of saying thank you for generations of soldiers. And as you can see, those of you who are veterans, all of us here have done a bit of soldiering. At this point, I would like to ask Reverend Bill Klossner to provide us with invocation, and bagpiper David Dines will then present Amazing Grace. Reverend?
Join me, if you would, in a spirit of prayer. Creator and sovereign of all, we gather this day in this place to lift up and thank you today for all the men and the women who have served in our armed forces and those who continue to serve. We're grateful for their dedication, discipline, faithfulness, and courage. From them, may we learn the virtues of selfless service, unswerving loyalty to country, the discipline of teamwork for the good of all, obedience to authority, and perseverance in difficult and challenging situations. Bless the families of our veterans for the sacrifices made at home when duty called their loved ones away to serve, and the challenges that made the times of separation difficult. We pray that you'll provide your care and healing power for our veterans who carry visible and invisible wounds from their days of service. And we lift up to your care those families who have lost a member of our armed forces in the line of duty. May your constant presence and help be theirs. We pray that today we will be able to express to our veterans our gratitude for their service to us. Keep our servicemen and women strong and determined. As we thank you for them, we look forward to the day promised when peace will rule on earth and when the bearing of arms to protect our citizens will no longer be necessary. And though we may approach you in many ways and by many names, this I pray in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Piper. Just an aside that was not scripted. You must remember, you must pity the poor man who hears the pipes and is nae a born Scot. So you always pay the piper. It's good luck for you, and it's even better luck for the piper. I want to reintroduce our director, Terry.
Thank you, Ron. We do have a few dignitaries we'd like to, at this point in time, recognize. Our Mayor, Lynn Matthews, also serves on our Board of Directors. Vice Mayor, Debbie Carey, City Manager Greg Murray, Assistant City Manager Melissa Reichart, Police Chief Pamela Davis, Fire Chief Ray Buggs, and then also we have a number of our Board of Directors here today. Would you all stand and be recognized on behalf of the museum? We thank you, and we thank all of the other dignitaries who we may have missed. Thank you for supporting the museum. We deeply appreciate it. Ron?
At this point, we would like you to all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and the rendering of the national anthem by Marcella Brown. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Marcella.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watch were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Certainly, one of the pleasures of being involved with this kind of ceremony is the opportunity to meet distinguished visitors and guests from our community. Our guest speaker today, George Eichman, is unique in several respects. Most of us here gathered today are veterans. Many of us are veterans, and we served in one of the branches of the service. Our guest today has the distinction of having served over the years in 3 branches of the military. As a young man in the Navy, he was aboard the Missouri when the radio news came that the Japanese were going to surrender. He left the Navy, and at the time of I hope that I get this correct, the Korean War, he went back into the military, and he wound up the 82nd Airborne. He went to Officers Candidate School. So from an enlisted rank to an officer's rank. And ultimately, he wound up in the United States Air Force. carrying his rank as an officer with him. I haven't said nearly enough about this individual who was an entrepreneur, the president of his own company, and on a trip around the United States with his wife, they visited relatives here in Punta Gorda. Those relatives and the people of the community obviously gave him a warm welcome because he decided to live here. He's a member of our community, and today, George Eichman is our guest speaker. And if he'd join us now, I'll sit down and keep quiet for a while. Welcome aboard.
Thank you, Major. Boy, that's some light in your eye here. I'd like to welcome all of you. I'm pleased to see that you turned out on Veterans Day. I thank you, and I thank all of the vets in the audience. I'd like to make at least one or two corrections to the Major's introduction. One is that I wasn't in the Air Force. As great as it is, I was in the Navy and the Army. I'd like to share with you today a couple of outstanding, exceptional experiences that I had in the Navy. The Army will save for another day. I joined the Navy in 1943 at the age of 16, which makes me going on 95 today. Somewhere I read that I told a lie. I'd rather say I just changed the date. After enlisting, I did my boot camp at Great Lakes, Illinois. And from there was sent to radio school at the Northwestern University. Upon graduation from radio school, I was sent to Pearl Harbor for reassignment. How, and I have never found out, but I wound up on Admiral Halsey's enlisted staff as a radio operator. And on many occasions, I acted as his personal radio man up in Flag Plot, or the war room, some people would call it. He was quite an individual that I could watch. I didn't participate in the conversations. We had a war room that was probably this size, maybe 30 by 30 feet, and it was just jammed with officers of his staff and this kid over on the radio. Our first combat was at Saipan, And then we worked our way through Peleliu, Ulithi, Palau, down into the Philippines. In November, we had quite a bit of action going on, and we withdrew and came back on December 16th. And the seas really started getting rough. I happened to be off watch when a destroyer was trying to refuel from our ship to his in very large hoses. It was the USS Spence. And I watched from the superstructure, and the two ships looked like they were going to bang together. And the fuel lines broke, and oil was going all over the place. And it became impossible. We couldn't refuel any ships. They were told to go back on station. Later that day, early evening, I was on watch in Flag Plot, and things really started getting hairy weather-wise. And the Admiral was trying to get the best information he could as to what direction the fleet should take to avoid a typhoon that was rapidly descending upon us. It was called Typhoon Cobra. I remember listening to the weather officer, Commander Costco, and he was telling the Admiral, we got the best information we can get. They would get them from some planes flying out from Pearl Harbor, which was thousands of miles from us, and any other source. The Admiral started getting provoked and said, give me the GD best navigational course to take. And he said, sir, the best I can tell you is that you should go in this southerly direction. The Admiral sent out notice to the entire fleet, and we had hundreds of ships strung out over about 2,500 miles. What happened is that the direction that the commander gave him was just the opposite of what happened. We ran right smack into the typhoon. On December 17th, 1944, we got word that 3 destroyers had been capsized, one of which was the Spence that I had just watched the day before, trying to refuel. Their problem was that they didn't have enough fuel, and the captains did not add salt water to give them a better ballast. At the peak of the storm, when they were sunk, capsized, we were encountering winds up to 145 miles an hour or more. And we had waves. The sea was reaching waves of 60 plus feet. The ceiling here, I think, is maybe 35 feet, 40 at the most. Sun seekers across the water here, the building that's being built. What they have now is probably about 60 feet. Well, you can imagine what that did to smaller ships like the Pence, USS Pence, USS Hull, and the USS Monahan. During the storm, this thing off. Maybe you wish I had. We lost 779 men, 3 ships, and 146 airplanes that were off of the aircraft carriers. They would break the chains that had them tied down. The sailors would try to maneuver them where maybe they would go over the side or what have you. Fortunately, there weren't. There were a couple of men killed, I think, in that, trying to get the ship out, or the airplanes. An interesting one, there were 2 aircraft that had been out on weather watch and came back, and the storm was just starting to build up. They couldn't land on the carriers. So they were ordered to turn their planes upside down and fall out. And both of them used their parachutes and were saved by destroyers that picked them up later. Must have been a hell of an experience. I was on a battleship at that time, USS New Jersey. Everything was tightened down. I was back in the radio shack on board ship, not the war room. That was closed down. And we just rolled and rolled. We had a foot of water in our sleeping compartments. Most of it was coming through the ventilation duct system. In the radio room, because of all the rolling, people were sick. They were copying code with buckets between their legs. So you can imagine how pleasant it was to sit in that room. After the typhoon subsided, ships were all over the place because the admiral had issued an order. In essence, everybody is on his own. So there was no formation. It was dark. As I said, the waves were horrendous and the winds, and everybody is going in a different direction. And that's with about 500 ships out there. Fortunately, there were no catastrophic collisions. After the storm subsided, we took account of the damages, and the destroyers had a very bad time, and the small carriers, CVE, had a very bad time. The larger ships, including our battleship, didn't incur much damage to the structure itself. But there was enough damage done that the Third Fleet had to pull out of action. And we went back to a place called Mog. Maybe you are in the Navy and aware of that. Had a big harbor. Had an investigation of the admiral for what had happened. And they didn't hold him totally responsible. But the recommendations were that there had to be something done with the ventilation systems, and that the captains of the ship, although there had been an order prior to this, had to fill their fuel tanks with seawater when you're anticipating the kind of weather that we got into. Because as the ship would go from side to side, the water would go the same way. And the stronger the winds and so forth, that finally it would reach the tipping point and go over. The three ships that I mentioned, the USS Spence lost one officer and 23 enlisted men. The Hull lost 7 officers and 55 men. And the Monahan lost all the officers. And I said, those numbers I gave you, those were survivors. And the Monahan had 6 enlisted survivors. So after we pulled back, the Admiralty staff, we came back to the States, spent some time, went back to Pearl Harbor, and transferred to the USS Missouri. And we're finishing up the invasion of Okinawa. And the Philippines was really catching hell. MacArthur was in charge of the ground troops, and Nimitz was in charge of the Navy. Halsey, with the Third Fleet, was to support MacArthur, which we did very admirably. The admirals were admirably. After that, we started moving in towards Japan. By that time, we had sunk almost all of the primary battleships, cruisers, aircraft carriers, you name it. But we kept moving in towards Japan and got to the point where we were circling Japan with as many ships as we had, including ours, bombarding at will the manufacturing facilities and bases, ground bases, and so forth. In August, we got word that Hiroshima had been almost obliterated by an atomic bomb. And I remember we were in the radio room and everybody looked at each other and said, "What the hell's an atomic bomb?" Shortly, I think it was about 8 days later, they dropped another one on Nagasaki. The Japanese, we had gotten their attention. And the military didn't want to give up. The emperor felt that it was necessary for his own people. And that's when a message came into Halsey. I happened to be monitoring that particular station, and it came in that it was from the Japanese. And they were, well, I hollered for the chief that I had some Jap on the line. He came over and took over and copied it out. It was the preliminaries to the surrender. There was still a lot of talking that went back and forth because, as I say, the military, they wanted to fight to the last man. They had no Navy, they had no Air Force, but they had 1 million men that they felt they could keep the enemy, us, from taking over the island, or at least prolong it. Thank God the emperor thought otherwise, and rather than give up his whole country, he agreed that, which was a stipulation of the Allies, that he would no longer be in charge, as they would put in someone he would report to, and that was General MacArthur. On September 2nd, the surrender took place on the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay. The bay was filled with ships. The setup was that they got the mess tables out of the enlisted area and a tablecloth or cloths from the officers' mess, and that was where the surrender table came into being. I was fortunate enough, as I look back on it, to get a position, the ship, incidentally, all through the superstructure. People were literally hanging, sailors literally hanging from any piece they could to get a view of the transactions. I got a position on top of a 16-inch gun directory, and it was looking right down on the table, surrender table. There were a bunch of officers right down below us. The Japanese were brought on board by a destroyer escort. we had waiting for them MacArthur, Nimitz, Halsey, and all the Allied officers that were to participate in the signing of the acceptance of the surrender. The Japanese had a foreign minister, Mitsui, who when he came in, I don't think anybody knew it, but he had a wooden leg or artificial leg, and he was not manipulating too well. The troops started laughing. MacArthur gave a hand signal and everybody stopped laughing. The countries that were represented was the United States, of course, the United Kingdom, the Soviet Union, Canada, New Zealand, the Netherlands, France, and I think that was the main countries that signed this surrender. At the end of the signing, there was this horrendous noise, and across the sky came our Air Force. There were 100 B-29s and 450 aircraft carrier-based aircraft. This went on for probably a half an hour. They were stacked up, flying over. It was the most awesome thing you've ever seen. So that ended. The admiral transferred his flag to the battleship South Dakota. And of course, wherever he went, we went. And we came back to the States, came under the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco. It was lined from side to side with people with flags and hollering. And we were all around the edges of the ship, standing at attention. And that night or a night after that, we had Bob Hope give a show on our fantail. Very funny, very enjoyable. And I thought this is a good place for that little 16-year-old kid to wind up his career. And that was the end of it. Thank you. Yeah.
One of the joys that we share by working here at the museum is that on occasion, a living participant comes and turns back a page in history for us. And we get some sense of the personal sacrifice and the personal involvement of individuals who live in our community who have contributed so much to who we are as a people. And certainly, our guest speaker today fulfilled the promise that we so much enjoy here at the museum. Again, sir, thank you very much. We appreciate it. Now I have the pleasure just to introduce Lynn Kaiser, who is from the Peace River Quilters, in reference to the Quilts of Valor that are being presented to the gentleman here on the stage. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Lynn Kaiser. I'm here to represent Quilts of Valor through the Peace River Quilt Guild. And I have two helpers here, Fran Clymer and Donna Graham. They're also with the Peace River Quilt Guild. Quilts of Valor is a grassroots group of quilters all across the United States, whose mission is to cover service members and veterans touched by war with comforting and healing quilts of valor. Since the group was founded by Catherine Roberts in 2003, when her son was deployed to Iraq, over 286,000 quilts have been presented to those serving during times of war. A quilt of valor conveys many messages. First of all, it honors you for your service in the military. It is because of dedicated men and women like you that we in the United States are able to sleep through the night knowing that we are protected. Secondly, we understand that the freedom is not free, and this quilt is meant to say thank you, not for just for your service, but for your sacrifices and those of your family during your time in the military, which covered World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and the Gulf Wars. Finally, we hope that these quilts will offer you in comfort in those times when the transition from war zone to peace is elusive. We know that those who have not been there do not have the capacity to imagine how difficult that transition was and remains for many. And now I'd like to tell you a little bit about each of these veterans' service. First of all, Dr. Ron Sush has been a soldier, a career police officer, and a college professor. Decorated and twice wounded combat Marine, he served in the Corps during Vietnam conflict, and his rank was a major. Following his combat tours, he served as an escort for Marines, returned to their families for burial. Prior to his retirement from law enforcement in 1995 at the rank of Deputy Inspector, he graduated from the United States Secret Service Academy and was a guest researcher and lecturer at both the FBI Academy and the British Police Staff College at Blamhill, England. He holds both undergraduate and graduate degrees from Ohio State University and graduate degrees from the University of South Carolina and the Citadel, the Military College of South Carolina as well. He earned his doctorate in history from the University of London's King College. He retired from college teaching in 2013 as a tenured professor and was a member of the graduate faculty to the United States Army's Sergeant's Major Academy at Fort Bliss. He is a West Point Fellow in History and a Marshall Fund Scholar with certifications from Christ College of Cambridge University and the Imperial College of Science, Technology, and Medicine of the University of London. His published works have appeared in Leatherneck magazine from 1985 to the present, and he is presently the historian for the Military Heritage Museum. I now take great pleasure in presenting Ron with this Quilt of Valor. Next, and I'm going a little out of order here, is my next recipient is Frank Campaign. He spent 1970 and 1971 in Vietnam as an infantry first lieutenant. His recon platoon was responsible for long-range patrols in the jungles surrounding the 101st Airborne Division of Operation. He was walking point when he sighted a series of fresh enemy bunkers and tripped a booby trap. His war was over. He was sent to Japan and spent a horrible week in the amputee ward. His foot was saved and he got on with his life. He used the GI Bill funds to go to college, and he spent 38 years as a high school social studies teacher, world history, psychology, sociology, and the Vietnam course. He has been retired for the last 10 years. He married his wife, Johanna, 52 years ago in 1990. They moved to Florida. They have 3 children, 10 grandchildren, and 3 great-grandchildren. I now take great pleasure in presenting you with your Quilt of Valor. Next, I have Command Chief Master Sergeant Jeffrey Sherwin. He joined the Army fresh out of high school in June of 1967, originally served with the 4th Armored Division in Germany, and then upon his return home, he switched to communications. He was deployed to Vietnam in September 1970 and served with the 25th Infantry Division as a battalion communications chief on a fire base. He was awarded the Bronze Star for Valor for actions during an attack on his base in October 1970. After the division was sent home, he was reassigned to the 2nd 501st Infantry of the 101st Airborne Division, where he served with Frank Campaign, our previous recipient. He came home in September of 1971 and was discharged in June of 1972. In civilian life, he served as a police officer, a volunteer fireman in 2 communities. He later spent 20 years with the Massachusetts Department of Corrections, retiring with the rank of captain. He also spent 2 terms on the Gardner, Massachusetts City Council. In 1981, he joined the Air Force Reserve and was assigned to the 439th Aeromedical Evacuation Squadron at Westover Air Force Base in Massachusetts. In 1990, his unit was deployed to Saudi Arabia for 9 months, with the responsibility of moving wounded soldiers from field hospitals to Germany for medical care. In May of 2001, he was appointed Command Chief Master Sergeant for the 439th Airlift Wing at Westover, and after 9/11 was placed on active duty for 3 years as Westover became the main refueling station for aircraft and troops being sent to the Middle East. Retired in November of 2008 after 34 years of service, and he has a total of 26 medals and decorations. Besides his Bronze Star, he was awarded 3 meritorious service medals, Combat Infantryman's Badge, and Air Force and Army Commendation Medals. He joined the Military Heritage Museum in 2014 and was elected Chief Guide in 2018 and continues to serve in that position. An interesting fact is the fact that Frank and Jeff served together in the 101st Air Force, 101st Airborne, I think that was. They both were from different states. They moved to Florida, and they met up here volunteering at the Military Heritage Museum almost 50 years later. Jeff, I now take great pleasure in presenting you with your Quilt of Valor. Next, I have Thomas McDonough. He's a captain in the U.S. Army Transportation Corps from 1969 to 1973. He was born in Rockland, Maine, and raised in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. He was commissioned second lieutenant in June of 1969, stationed at the Department of Defense headquarters in Eastern Area Military Traffic Management and Terminal Service at the Brooklyn Army Terminal, Brooklyn, New York, in the Office of Director. MTMTS provided support for the Vietnam War through cargo operations at its military ocean terminals in Bayonne, New Jersey, Oakland, California, and Sunny Point, North Carolina, as well as commercial ports. He was assigned to the 4th Transportation Command Headquarters, Saigon, as an advisor in March of 1970. Logistical responsibilities included operation of water terminals and cargo movement and distribution. He was awarded the Joint Service Commendation Medal for exceptionally meritorious service while assigned to the Directorate. Assigned to the most honorable honor of all, being named the Survivor Assistant Officer for a fallen brother. Captain William F. Reichert, a graduate of West Point in 1968, was killed in Vietnam on January 27th in 1971. Tom had the honor of meeting his body at JFK Airport with full military honors and accompanying him to his home in Valley Stream, Long Island, New York. He had the privilege of assisting his family while also standing watch over Captain Reichert until his interment at Long Island National Cemetery in Farmingdale, New York. He wants to accept his quilt today in the name of Captain Reichert in his memory with honor. Tom's been married for 51 years to his wife and best friend Sheila. They have a son and daughter and 4 beautiful grandchildren. He had a career in medical equipment sales and varied management positions. He's currently serving on the board at St. Vincent de Paul, as well as volunteering as an interviewer and an administrator. He's a member of the safety committee at Sacred Heart Church, as well as a member of the Knights of Columbus 80174. He's a past Commodore of the Punta Gorda Boat Club. His hobbies are he's a certified NRA training counselor who enjoys teaching classes for safe and responsible gun handling and enjoys time with friends. Tom, I take great pleasure in presenting you with your Quilt of Valor. The quilt was made by Donna. Russ Perry is next. He enlisted with the U.S. Marines in 1965 and was subsequently selected to go to Marine Security Guard School in Washington, D.C. He was assigned to the American Embassy in Helsinki, Finland from 1966 to 1968. He was discharged from the United States Marine Corps in July of 1969 as a sergeant. After he was discharged from the United States Marine Corps, he applied for and was selected as a border patrol agent and stationed in El Paso, Texas. He was subsequently transferred to Washington, D.C. as the supervisory special agent and later detailed to the U.S. Department of Justice as the assistant chief of Interpol. After 32 years of service, he retired from the U.S. Immigration and Naturalization Service. In 1986, while working at the Department of Justice, he was offered a direct commission with the U.S. Coast Guard Reserve. He was assigned to the Coast Guard Intelligence Unit in Washington, D.C., and later in Miami, which oversaw the drug smuggling activities and illegal migration of Cubans and Haitians. He completed 16 years as a reservist, and that, along with his 4 years in the Marine Corps, he was able to retire from the military as a lieutenant. He has 5 wonderful boys, the youngest who's still in college, and 4 grandchildren. He enjoys activities that are outside, especially snow skiing, bicycling, as well as the gym. And he is a student of history and enjoys reading and anything that relates to politics. He also enjoys and receives great personal satisfaction working as a volunteer with St. Vincent de Paul and Sacred Heart Church. Russ, I now present you with your Quilt of Valor. Next, we have Gary Murky. He was a sergeant in the United States Air Force. He joined the Air Force right out of high school, was trained at Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas, and at Amarillo Air Force Base in Amarillo, Texas. After training, his first assignment was in Korea. He was assigned to a remote island named Pangyongdo. The island is 3 miles wide and 5 miles long. The Air Force has a radar station on the island. He was one of 20 airmen on that island that is located just north of the DMZ. I was responsible for all communications to and from our station. After 13 months, I was assigned to Air Force Satellite Tracking Station in Los Angeles, California. I prepared communications supporting 9 satellite tracking stations around the world. I was honorably discharged after this assignment. After my discharge, after his discharge from the Air Force, he worked for Unisys for 41 years, retired as a director, and he was responsible for an organization that provided complete cargo processing for 13 major airlines around the world. He earned a Bachelor of Science degree by going to night school at the University of Minnesota. He's married to his wife, Sherry, for 28 years, and currently he volunteers at St. Vincent de Paul. He is a past president of the organization, and in his spare time, he enjoys boating and fishing. He was born in Morris, Minnesota, and has lived in London, England for 3 years, Sydney, Australia for 2, and Rio de Janeiro, Brazil for 1 year. Gary, I now take great pleasure in presenting you with your Quilt of Valor. Thank you very much.
I have a hard time discerning just how much work went in to these Quilts of Valor, these ladies, and their effort to provide recognition to these veterans is indeed worthy of much appreciation, and I'm sure I speak for my colleagues here, that we really do appreciate this, and I intend to use mine on a number of occasions. My wife likes to keep the air conditioner really high, and I'm getting older. Right now, we're privileged to have with us an individual, and I'm still having a hard time pronouncing the last name, but Brian, let me just go with the first name, is going to provide us with a very appropriate rendering of God Bless the USA.
If tomorrow all the things were gone I'd worked for all my life, and I had to start again with just my children and my wife, I thank my lucky stars to be living here today, 'cause the flag still stands for freedom and they can't take that away. And I'm proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free. And I won't forget the ones who died and gave that right to me. And I gladly stand up next to you and defend her still today. 'Cause there ain't no doubt I love this land. God bless the USA. From the lakes of Minnesota to the hills of Tennessee, across the plains of Texas, from sea to shining sea, from Detroit down to Houston and New York to LA. Well, there's pride in every American heart, and it's time we stand and say, and I'm proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free. And I won't forget the ones who died and gave that right to me. And I gladly stand up next to you and defend her still today. 'Cause there ain't no doubt I love this land. God bless the USA. And I'm proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free. And I won't forget the ones who died and gave that right to me. And I gladly stand up next to you and defend her still today. 'Cause there ain't no doubt I love this land. God bless the USA. Thank you. It's an honor to be here. Thank you.
There's always a question in my mind when I'm reading my own notes. Right now, am I correct? We're going to have a very brief video honoring all those who serve, and it's a video tribute. This will be followed by something that's really very special with us, the Bells of Peace, and that's going to be presented by a combat Marine from our academy, from our history staff here at the museum, Franz Brutus. And that will be followed ultimately with a few final concluding remarks, and ultimately ending with taps, which will conclude our presentation. And now I'm lost. Is there going to be a film? Somebody say yes or no. Yes. There we go.
Raise your right hand and repeat after me. I state your name. Do solemnly swear to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and to bear true faith and allegiance to the same. That I will obey the orders of the President of the United States and the orders of those officers appointed over me according to regulations and the Uniform Code of Military Justice. So help me God.
We celebrate Veterans Day on the anniversary of the armistice that ended World War I. The armistice that began on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. The timing of this holiday is quite deliberate in terms of historical fact. But somehow it always seems quite fitting to me that this day comes deep in autumn, when the colors are muted and the days seem to invite contemplation. It is, in a way, an odd thing to honor those who died in defense of our country, in defense of us, in wars far away. The imagination plays a trick. We see these soldiers in our mind as old and wise, but most of them were boys when they died, and they gave up two lives, the one they were living and the one they would have lived. When they died, they gave up their chance to be husbands and fathers and grandfathers. They gave up their chance to be revered old men. They gave up everything for our country, for us. And all we can do is remember. I will not fail thee, nor forsake thee. In memory of those who gave the last full measure of devotion, may our efforts to achieve lasting peace gain strength. Let us make a vow to our dead. Let us show them by our actions that we understand what they died for. Strengthened by their courage, heartened by their value, and born by their memory, let us continue to stand for the ideals for which they lived and died.
In the long history of the world, only a few generations have been granted the role of defending freedom in its hour of maximum danger. I do not shrink from this responsibility. I welcome it. I do not believe that any of us would exchange places with any other people or any other generation. The energy, the faith, the devotion which we bring to this endeavor will light our country and all who serve it. We shall pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any friend, oppose any foe to assure the survival and the success of liberty.
One of the interesting things that takes place here with the guides, whether it's in the galleries or in the library, in the simulation room, etc., individuals all have their own story. And they bring them to the museum because they feel comforted and comfortable sharing this story. And oftentimes the stories begin with, I had an uncle who served in Korea, and he never talked about it. And it creates the impression that it was so horrible, so disarming, that these individual veterans can't speak about the experience. But then a grandson or a great nephew comes back from another war, from the Middle East or from Vietnam, and suddenly Uncle Joe sits down and talks about the experience. And one of the interesting things, when the family said, Joe, you never talked about this before, and he looks at them and smiles and simply says, you wouldn't have understood. But one of the sad stories that comes here, and I feel obligated to share it, and I've commented a number of times, I have trifocals, I have a hearing aid, and I have more spots than a Dalmatian dog. But none of this came from combat experience in Vietnam. And there are other men my age, and I'm soon to be 80. That's a long time ago. I went to a high school reunion, and I was surprised to see how many old people were there. But the gentleman will be talking to his family, including his wife, and the children and grandchildren saying, well, Grandpa, are you taking care of this? Are you doing anything? And he looks at them and says, well, maybe it's time I go to the VA. And the family looks at him and said, Dad, you were never in the military. And he said, yes, I was. And he goes someplace and he finds his DD-214, his discharge paper. He was an infantryman in the Army in 1965, and he had a combat tour in Vietnam. But he came home to a very unresponsive country. In some instances, ridiculed. And one of the comments was, weren't you smart enough to be able to avoid that? Aren't we fortunate that he didn't avoid it? And his entire family, maybe he didn't go on to college, so he didn't use the GI Bill, and maybe he went FHA instead of the VA for a loan. If he bought a home, maybe he moved. But it's only been in more recent years that people come up to veterans and say, thank you for your service. And it's really nice when they do that. Remember one particular veteran, how do you respond to that? You say, thank you. And his general comment was, it was my pleasure. And if they continued on because they had read Tom Brokaw's book, The Greatest Generation, the old veteran sometimes smiles and says, if you're that serious about thanking me, why don't you just buy me a beer and we'll call it square? At the conclusion of World War I, and this has happened numerous places, the British refer to this as Remembrance Day in many instances. The bells went silent in England, France throughout the war. And it wasn't until the armistice and afterward that bells rang again. And to commemorate that, not only the conclusion of hostilities in Europe, and one of the interesting things is a youngster coming here saw all kinds of displays and people talking about World War II. And he asked, was there a World War I? And his parents, not being terribly critical, of course there was a World War I, otherwise it wouldn't have been a World War II. Ladies and gentlemen, there was no World War I until the United States was attacked on December 7th, 1941. Then we got sophisticated and we start numbering them. The fact of the matter is, until we got involved, the war in Europe was referred to as the Great War, or just the war. Veterans didn't give it a number. They knew where they came from. Now we have a World War II. Some time ago, I was crossing a parking lot and a woman came out of a grocery store with her son. She saw the license plate on my car. And the youngster scampered across the parking lot and said, "Are you a veteran?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And he said, and he pointed to his mother and said, "My mom said I should come and thank you." And I said, "I appreciate that. Tell your mother I appreciate it." And as he turned and started back, he looked over his shoulder and said, "I hope that I'm a soldier someday." And all I could think about, my God, son, I hope you're not. I hope we don't need you. But thank God we have them. One of the questions that comes here, how long was Vietnam, etc., and when were you in it? And so you tell them the dates. And some people say, when was the Vietnam War for you specifically? And many of us answer very specifically, it was yesterday. It was yesterday. It's as close as our scars and our tattoo. And being here, to some extent, is therapeutic for people who come in and share their stories, and it's therapeutic for us as well. Right now, I'd like to introduce Franz Brutus. He's on our museum staff here, and he's going to present the Bells of Peace. Just a few concluding remarks, which will be followed by the playing of taps by bugler Ted Holt, United States Army veteran. What do you say to the good folks who attend something like this? Say goodbye, thank you for coming, drive carefully going home. There's a policeman in there someplace that's saying, drive carefully, etc. But there was a way, some of you veterans will remember this. So I prefer, instead of going through that, I want to thank you all for being here. I want you to avail yourself of the museum if you choose after taps. But I want to say goodbye to those of you who have worn this country's uniform. And I want to say it the old way. not the politically correct way, the old way. Godspeed. Come back to us safe. In adversity, take the fight to the enemy. Good hunting.